Welcome to our live Tuesdays at 2. I am your host, Antoinette LaGrossa. For those of you new to homeschooling or ShillerLearning, we are part of the nonprofit Rising Stars Foundation, and our goal is to help students of all abilities and budgets get the benefit of a Montessori-based personalized education to help them fulfill their potential. If you like homeschooling tips in general or a Montessori-based approach in particular, do go ahead and hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel if you are watching that replay. If you are watching the replay, you may see me pause occasionally. I am taking questions live. Again, if you do have any questions during the presentation, go ahead and put those into that chat box. We work them into the presentation, and I also do Q&A at the end. ShillerLearning supports homeschool parents in a number of ways, including our homeschool blog. Do explore that. There are a ton of awesome free resources that will help your homeschool journey no matter what approach you are taking. Now, there is a powerful Montessori technique called the 3-period lesson. It is built into the scripted ShillerLearning curriculum. The 3-period lesson is a simple but effective gap preventer. It ensures on a daily basis that your child is understanding the materials and concepts with which they are working. It's a process for teaching children which is interactive and respectful to the child, and we can even make it playful. So let's dive in. First, we'll take a look at what the 3-period lesson is, and then give some tips for making the most of it. So as I mentioned, it's a way of presenting new information to your child. It's used when learning new vocabulary for things such as letters, shapes, numbers, colors, more advanced place value, and so much more. The same rhythm of the 3-period lesson is used in instruction of more advanced elementary concepts as well. So as the name implies, there are 3 simple organic steps. You'll notice I have a picture where you are pointing to an object. And that is exactly what we do in the first period. This is when we are naming objects using a quote, "this is" statement. In this case, if we are introducing some US President's nomenclature cards, ShillerLearning does offer these. You can find these on our website. The first step would be to show the child. So this is George Washington. Then go on to the next. This is John Adams. This is Thomas Jefferson. In Montessori, generally, we introduce 3 new terms, new objects at a time. And then you can, as each of those is introduced with that "this is" statement, go ahead and give time for them to explore it, whether they're going to take some time and, in this case, look at the picture or pick up and touch and explore an actual physical object. You only want to move on from this first period to the next if you think your child is going to be successful. If you see that your child is not understanding what you're saying, they're not digesting it, they're not paying attention, you want to go ahead and simply reintroduce it as if for the very first time. You've been naming people, places, things for your child from the very beginning since they were a baby. And this same naming technique ha- is very effective when it is used for introducing things in their education as well. Okay, so once we know our child is going to be successful with that next period, we move on to the second in that 3-period lesson, which is when the child is going to show you. They are now using recognition skills, whereas in that first period lesson, they are using listening and observing skills. Again, with this, you only want to move on once you think that the child is going to be successful with that next period. So in this case, in that first period, you were showing the child. Now the child is going to show you. This is when practice is really taking place in their learning. So the second period tends to be the longest. And Montessori understood how important movement is for learning. And so with working with actual materials and playing games of showing me, can you find this? You can hide the objects around the room and play a scavenger hunt. There are different ways of working movement into that. In the case of using nomenclature cards, another nice thing is that the material is also self-checking. So once the child is able to match the name or show you, there is a control card where they are able to go ahead and check to see if they have that correct. If you were introducing some new geometric shapes, you could simply ask the child to, show me the circle, show me the square, show me the triangle. That's actually one of the first lessons in ShillerLearning Math Kit 1, where the 3-period lesson is implemented is in that introduction of some basic geometric shapes. And the child has that opportunity to feel and explore the shapes. And then you as the parent are pointing to those, I'm sorry, asking the child to point to those with showing you that. The final step in the 3-period lesson is a what is statement. And with this, then the child is able to articulate. This is when they are verbalizing back to you identification of that. In the case of a simple geometric shape or a more advanced concept, they have to have that recognition from that second period, but now they also are able to articulate that and saying it back to you. And the 3-period lesson is integrating all of the learning modalities, the visual, auditory, tactile, and kinesthetic into a single method of teaching. So it's going to help to hardwire those concepts faster. Now, modification for this period, if you have a child with special needs that is nonverbal, thank you. That's a great question on this. So for a child who is nonverbal or who is very young, sometimes, a child is young for being able to say things back to you. You can simply skip that part of the activity. And in the case of the nomenclature cards, that matching is going to let you know that they are able to identify that or with pointing or selecting, finding that object. And then you can work on that third period, the articulation, when that becomes developmentally appropriate for that child. So you can skip that, what is that articulation, giving that back to you verbally, and simply allow them to work with the materials and with the concepts. Okay, now, if your child answered something incorrectly in this period, you want to go back and simply reintroduce the prior period as if for the first time. If they're not successful with the second period, you can back up to the first. So that is one way of approaching it if your child makes a mistake. The other way is to employ the Socratic method and ask questions that are designed to help the child discover their own error. So if you were to point to George Washington and ask, who is this? And your child were to misidentify him as Thomas Jefferson, you could simply ask, can you show me, or excuse me, who is this? Holding up the Thomas Jefferson card or pointing to the Thomas Jefferson card. And often simply asking a question for which the wrong answer previously given by the child would be the correct answer is enough to trigger self-recognition of their mistake. If that doesn't work, the questioning, again, you can simply back up to a previous period in the lesson. Okay, and the first tip to make the 3-period most effective is to start with actual physical objects. Now, sometimes in the case of, something like a president, you don't have that physical person there, but we can have a picture representing that. And the child can learn names of vegetables, flowers, animals with objects that you have in the house, either real, actual objects or small replications of those. So for instance, if you're in science learning ocean animals and your child has a set of toy ocean animals, you can use those to first identify them and then learn characteristics about them and get into more in-depth information. But by starting with that physical object, no matter what topic you are learning about, a physical object or a picture of that, it is going to help it make it more concrete for the child and make it less likely that they are going to get confused between the names of items and the characteristics of items or their properties or rules that pertain to them. One of the things that you immediately notice when observing in a Montessori classroom, which I have had the pleasure of seeing ShillerLearning curricula being used in a Montessori classroom. But one of the things you notice is how little instruction, verbal instruction, a teacher gives in comparison to a traditional class teacher. It is not a structure where there is a lengthy instructional lecture followed by worksheets. As Montessori home educators, we too want to use as few words as possible. We do not tell them how to do it, we show them. And in demonstrating concepts with materials within that 3-period lesson, kids are going to discern qualities of the things around them, as well as absorb information, the names of objects, how things work in the case of doing multi-digit operations with the decimal material and the number cards, actually, how to conceptually achieve those goals, do those operations with the materials. Learning by doing, which means we do not need to give them a lot of words. Montessori has a quote. It really is just, I think, my top Montessori quote. There are so many good ones that are great inspiration for our homeschooling. But what the hand does, the mind remembers. And that is why we want to show them as opposed to telling them. And so when your child does make a mistake, instead of explaining why there was a mistake in that process after you've gone through that questioning, trying to get them to identify and self-correct their mistake. And the reason we want them to self-identify and self-correct those mistakes is because they're going to be less likely to repeat that same mistake again in the future when they are doing that. And so going through and showing them why it works the way it does, how to do that, as opposed to telling them, again, that's going to make it more likely that they remember that again in the future. And studies show that learning by doing, no matter what your dominant learning style is, that is the most effective way for students to learn and be able to repeat concepts. Okay, so tip number 3 is allowing for repetition and exploration. So as I mentioned, the second period tends to be the longest of all of the periods. That's where the practice is going to be happening. But you can also allow time in that initial first period to make sure that indeed the student is listening to you, they are observing the things so that they will have success in that next stage. And we don't want to move on until we feel confident that the student is going to be successful with that next one. That second period is the longest, and this is when you can play games, incorporate movement, and it can take place over a course of days, weeks, or even months before the child achieves mastery with that. So don't feel like it needs to happen in that first day. The fourth tip for getting the most out of that is to role play. If you've never done this, you'll have a lot of fun with it for the child. So you simply switch roles, and now the child is asking you questions instead of the reverse. Kids love playing teacher. I know I did when I was a kid. And as the student, you can then occasionally throw in wrong answers and see if your child catches it. Our fifth tip is letting the child lead in celebration of their accomplishments. Along with that is that you want to make sure that the praise that you're giving, that we do encourage generous praise, but it should be genuine praise. And we want to avoid praise that distracts. So we would want to wait until an activity is over. And then when we are praising the child, try to focus and comment on that process. I saw how hard you worked on that. I liked the way that you carefully checked your work. That kind of praise helps to cultivate a growth mindset where the child values their hard work, what it took to get to accomplishing that goal. And as opposed to, conditioning a child to seek an outcome for external approval coming from you. That kind of motivation tends to be short-lived and dissipate quickly, unfortunately, in the face of a challenge where they're not easily getting everything right and ending up with a fixed mindset as opposed to the growth mindset. And the purpose of the 3-period lesson is to help ensure better understanding for the child and to give them knowledge that is going to be retained and therefore able to be applied as they are then asked to work with those materials, those concepts. It gives an opportunity for them to absorb what you are showing them. And in that 3-period lesson is going to be indeed a very simple but effective gap preventer for you. And the child is going to enjoy it, be playful in applying all steps of that 3-period lesson, especially when you do go ahead and do that role playing. You can have a lot of fun with that. And it's going to help your child become a lifelong learner and develop that growth mindset that will serve them in so many ways in all of their years. Okay, well, as promised, this was a short educator break. I hope these tips help you to implement that 3-period lesson more effectively as you're using the ShillerLearning Math and Language Arts curricula, or to, apply that 3-period lesson in any subject that you're teaching. Did anyone have any questions that we did not get to during the presentation? So the 3-period lesson is most commonly associated with that, the absorbent period when the child is very young, but it can be implemented all throughout into, upper elementary concepts. It's not just for the very young. And you can actually see it in the structure of Math Kit 2 as well for 4th grade through pre-algebra, which for a lot of kids is 8th grade, sorry. Yeah, so it can be used in any subject, and it's very effective for all ages, especially the very young, but certainly at any age, it's going to be a very effective tool. And then from concept to concept, you'll find that the length of those different periods is going to be different. And so, having that personalized pace through a curriculum enables you to, you see that your child in that 2nd period is able to just, kind of instantly be able to show you, point to those things, identify them non-verbally, then you don't have to do additional practice. You can simply move on to that next period. And again, that verbalization happens fast. Great, we're going to move through at an accelerated pace. Yeah, so all steps in that 3-period lesson get to be the repetition, the speed with which you go through those is personalized for each child. Okay, and just glancing back through there, making sure we are going to go ahead and break for today. You can, if we can be of any other assistance, we are always happy to help.